The conference hall on Station Omega was bigger than any building Colonel Marcus Reed had ever seen. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that caught light from dozens of different stars and threw it back in rainbow patterns across the enormous space. Reed had to squint sometimes when the light hit his eyes just right. 300 different alien species had come to this meeting, each one wanting to prove they were the best fighters in the galaxy. The reason was simple but serious. A hostile alien empire called the Vorthons was threatening to attack peaceful worlds, and the Galactic Defense Council needed to figure out which species should lead the fight against them. Reed sat in a small section marked for humans, looking around at the much larger areas given to other species. The human delegation had only 6 chairs, while some alien groups had entire sections with hundreds of seats. Reed didn't mind being small. He had learned long ago that size didn't always matter in a fight. The demonstrations had been going on for hours, and Reed watched each one carefully. The Zephyrians went first, and they were impressive. They looked like tall, thin humans but with blue skin that seemed to glow from the inside. General Tetris, their leader, stood up and raised both hands above his head. Electricity began dancing between his fingers, growing brighter and more powerful until he pointed at targets set up across the hall. Lightning bolts shot from his hands and hit each target perfectly, leaving smoking holes in the metal. The alien audience made approving sounds, clicks, buzzes, and musical tones that Reed's universal translator couldn't quite interpret but obviously meant they were impressed. Admiral Nash, who sat next to Reed, leaned over and whispered, "That would be useful in a battle. Natural weapons that never run out of ammunition." Next came the Kortak, and Reed had to admit they looked terrifying. They were built like giant beetles, each one about 8 feet tall and covered in thick shiny armor that looked like it was made from black metal. Commander Vex stepped into the demonstration area while other aliens set up plasma weapons, the kind that could melt through steel in seconds. The plasma bolts hit Commander Vex directly, and his armor glowed red-hot from the heat. But when the weapon stopped firing, he simply brushed dust off his chest and walked away without a scratch. His species didn't need tanks or protective suits, they were born armored. The telepathic Mindari were even more impressive in a different way. Captain Liss stood perfectly still in the center of the demonstration area while 20 of her soldiers moved around her in complex patterns. They never spoke or made signals, but they moved together like they were all parts of the same body. When one soldier changed direction, all the others instantly knew and adjusted their movements to match. Reed watched this display with particular interest. Perfect coordination in battle was something human armies had tried to achieve for thousands of years, but it required constant training and communication equipment. These aliens were born with it. Admiral Nash shook her head in amazement. "Each species has something we completely lack," she said quietly. "Natural weapons, natural armor, natural communication. What do humans bring to galactic warfare?" Reed made notes on his tablet while listening to conversations around him. The universal translator in his ear was picking up fragments of what other alien delegates were saying about humans, and most of it wasn't flattering. He heard words like soft-skinned, fragile, weak, and primitive weapons. A shadow fell across Reed's tablet, and he looked up to see Council Leader Varn standing over the human section. Varn was massive, nearly 10 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and skin that looked like gray stone. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks grinding together in an earthquake. "Colonel Reed," Varn said, and every alien in the nearby sections turned to listen. "Your species will present last, as is traditional for new council members. We are curious to see what Earth brings to galactic warfare." The way Varn said the word "curious" made it clear that he didn't expect much from humans. Reed could see amusement in the council leader's large eyes, the kind of look adults gave to children who wanted to play with the grown-ups. Reed stood up and smiled politely. "I think you'll find our presentation educational, Council Leader." Varn nodded and moved on, but Reed could hear him talking to other alien leaders as he walked away. The universal translator caught phrases like "humor them" and "cultural exchange value." As the demonstrations continued, Reed watched each species show off abilities that humans simply couldn't match. No human could shoot lightning from their hands, survive plasma weapons with their bare skin, or coordinate with teammates through telepathy. Humans had no enhanced strength, no natural weapons, no special powers at all. Admiral Nash looked worried. "Marcus, how are we supposed to compete with any of this? We're just humans with metal tools and chemical weapons." Reed continued making notes, but his expression remained calm. In fact, as the alien demonstrations became more impressive, Reed found himself looking forward to humanity's turn even more. These aliens had no idea what they were about to learn about human warfare. "Don't worry, Admiral," Reed said quietly. I think we're about to give them a very interesting education. When humanity's turn finally arrived, Colonel Reed stood up from his chair and walked slowly to the central platform. The enormous hall became quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that happens when people are being polite while expecting to be bored. Reed could see alien delegates checking their time devices and shifting in their seats like they were already thinking about what came next. Reed activated the holographic display system with a simple touch of his hand. The air above the platform shimmered and then filled with a three-dimensional image that floated in space where everyone could see it. He looked out at the 300 alien representatives and smiled calmly. "Distinguished delegates," Reed began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. "I will not be demonstrating energy blasts or natural armor today. Instead, I would like to tell you about how humans fight." The first image that appeared above the arena surprised everyone. Instead of showing weapons or soldiers, Reed displayed a map of Earth with different colored areas showing various types of land. There were yellow deserts, white frozen areas, blue oceans, green jungles, brown mountains, and gray cities. Reed gestured toward the floating map. Humans have fought wars in every environment our planet offers. From the frozen wastes of Antarctica where the temperature drops to 70 degrees below zero, to the scorching Sahara Desert where it reaches 60 degrees above zero. We have fought underwater, underground, in thin mountain air where most species cannot breathe, and even in the vacuum of space. Admiral Nash stood up from the human section and joined Reed on the platform. She was a smaller woman with gray hair, but she moved with the confidence of someone who had seen many battles. What makes human warfare unique is not our physical abilities. It is our approach to solving problems. We do not fight the same way twice. The display changed to show historical battle maps from Earth's past. Reed pointed to each one as he explained. This shows Hannibal crossing the Alps mountains with elephants to attack the Roman Empire from a direction they never expected. Here, Vikings used rivers as highways to surprise their enemies. And here, guerrilla fighters in Vietnam turned jungle terrain into an advantage against a much more powerful army. A low murmur ran through the alien delegates. Reed noticed that several species were leaning forward in their seats, paying much closer attention than they had planned to when the presentation started. Reed clicked to the next series of images, which showed early humans facing much larger and more dangerous animals. For example, when early humans faced creatures much larger and stronger than themselves, they did not try to become bigger or stronger. Instead, they created tools, used teamwork, and turned the environment into a weapon. The display showed primitive humans using fire to drive massive predators away from water sources. Then it showed coordinated hunting parties attacking the animals when they were weak and desperate for water. The alien audience watched with growing interest as they saw how humans had survived on a planet full of creatures that could easily kill them. Council leader Varn's four large eyes narrowed as he focused on the images. "But surely these are primitive examples from your ancient past? Your current military must operate differently with modern technology." Admiral Nash stepped forward, her expression serious. "Actually, sir, modern human warfare still follows exactly the same principles. We study our enemies, identify what advantages they have, then find ways to make those advantages completely irrelevant." She activated her own part of the presentation, showing more recent conflicts from Earth's history. "When facing enemies with superior air power, we fight at night or underground where their aircraft cannot see us. When outnumbered by larger armies, we use guerrilla tactics to attack small groups and disappear before they can respond. When outgunned by better weapons, we target supply lines instead of fighting their soldiers directly." The images showed human soldiers using tunnels, fighting in darkness, and attacking supply convoys instead of engaging in direct battles. The alien delegates began to understand that humans fought in ways that were completely different from anything they had seen before. Commander Vex, the massive armored Kortak representative, shifted uncomfortably in his reinforced chair. His natural armor made him nearly invincible in direct combat, but what he was hearing made him nervous. "Are you saying that your species avoids direct combat because you are too weak to fight properly?" Reed's smile grew wider as he answered. "Not avoid, Commander. We choose when and where combat occurs. We make the enemy fight on our terms, not theirs." Admiral Nash nodded and added, "If you have natural armor, we will fight you in ways where armor does not help. If you can shoot lightning, we will attack when you cannot see us to aim. If you have telepathic coordination, we will find ways to disrupt your communications." The alien delegates were no longer making the dismissive sounds they had been making earlier. In fact, the massive hall had grown remarkably quiet as the implications of what they were hearing began to sink in. Reed could see concern starting to replace amusement on many alien faces. Reed looked out at the audience and realized that for the first time since the presentations had begun, he had everyone's complete attention. The humans might not have natural weapons or armor, but they had something else entirely. They had learned to turn every enemy's strength into a weakness. And the aliens were just beginning to understand what that meant. Council leader Varn raised one of his 4 massive arms to get everyone's attention. The hall fell silent as his voice boomed across the space like thunder rolling through mountains. These theories about human warfare are interesting to discuss, but warfare is ultimately about practical results. We will test all species using our advanced combat simulation system. The arena floor began to change as Varn spoke. What had been solid crystal became a shimmering holographic battlefield that looked completely real. Mountains appeared in the distance, while the center showed a fortified position surrounded by flat, open ground with nowhere to hide. The simulation was designed to be as realistic as possible, down to the smell of gunpowder and the feeling of wind. Varn gestured toward the battlefield. Each species will be given identical resources and weapons. Your task is simple: defend this position against overwhelming enemy forces for as long as possible. The simulation is designed to test how you handle impossible odds. The Zephyrians volunteered to go first. General Tichwss and 4 of his officers stepped into the simulation, and immediately the air around them began crackling with electricity. When the enemy attack began, they created impressive barriers of pure energy that stopped incoming weapons fire. Lightning bolts shot from their hands, striking enemy soldiers with deadly accuracy. For the first hour, the Zephyrians looked unstoppable. Their natural electrical powers seemed perfect for defensive warfare. But Reed noticed something the alien observers missed. The Zephyrians were using more and more energy with each attack, and they were starting to move more slowly. When their natural energy reserves finally ran out, the Zephyrians suddenly became ordinary soldiers with ordinary weapons. The enemy forces, which had been held back by the electrical barriers, rushed forward and quickly overran the exhausted defenders. The Kortak went next, and their approach was completely different. Commander Vex and his team simply stood in a line and let the enemy attack them directly. Their natural armor was so strong that weapons fire bounced off them like rain hitting a roof. They formed an unbreakable defensive wall that nothing could penetrate. But the simulation was smarter than that. Enemy forces began moving around the Kortak position, attacking from the sides and behind. The heavily armored defenders tried to turn to face the new threats, but they moved too slowly. They couldn't adapt quickly enough to prevent the enemy from getting past their static defense line. The Mindari performance was beautiful to watch. Captain Liss and her team moved like dancers, each soldier knowing exactly where the others were and what they were doing without any spoken communication. Their telepathic coordination created an elegant defense that responded instantly to every enemy move. Admiral Nash leaned forward in her seat, impressed by their teamwork. "That's the kind of coordination human armies dream about," she whispered to Reed. But the simulation had a nasty surprise for the Mindari too. Enemy forces began targeting their telepathic leaders with special weapons designed to disrupt mental communication. Once the mental links were broken, the beautiful coordination collapsed entirely. The Mindari soldiers suddenly found themselves alone and confused, unable to work together effectively. Species after species followed the same basic pattern. Each group started strong, using their natural abilities to create impressive defenses. But the simulation was designed to find weaknesses, and every species had the same problem: they relied too heavily on their special powers and couldn't adapt when those powers were neutralized. Finally, it was humanity's turn. Colonel Reed walked into the simulation followed by 5 human officers: Admiral Nash, Captain Lisa Torres, Lieutenant Mike Johnson, Sergeant Amy Parker, and Major Tom Wilson. The alien delegates watched with curiosity to see how the humans would handle the impossible scenario. Reed's team did something that shocked everyone watching. They abandoned their assigned defensive position entirely. "What are they doing?" Commander Vex asked, his multiple eyes trying to track the human movements as they spread out across the battlefield. "Are they retreating already?" Instead of waiting in the fortified position for the enemy to attack, the humans scattered across the entire simulation area. Reed could see the alien observers becoming confused as his team seemed to be running away from the battle before it even started. But the humans weren't running away. They were setting traps using the simulation's own terrain features. Captain Torres found a narrow valley where enemy forces would have to bunch together, then placed explosive charges at both ends. Lieutenant Johnson created false positions that looked like human defenders but were actually just decoys designed to waste enemy ammunition. Major Wilson positioned himself on high ground where he could see the entire battlefield and coordinate the team's movements. Sergeant Parker found ways to use the simulation's weather system, waiting for fog to roll in before moving to new positions. When the enemy forces finally approached the original human defensive position, they found it completely empty except for cleverly disguised explosive devices. As the enemy spread out to search for the missing defenders, they walked directly into a series of carefully planned ambushes. Captain Torres had positioned herself where she could observe enemy movements and radio information to the rest of the team. "They're adapting to our initial traps," she reported calmly into her communication device. "Enemy forces are splitting into smaller groups. Switching to Plan Charlie." Reed smiled as he heard the report. Plan Charlie meant abandoning all current positions and attacking from completely new directions. The human team immediately shifted tactics, leaving positions that were about to be discovered and striking the enemy from angles they never expected. The simulation ran for 6 hours before the system administrators finally called a halt. The humans were not only still fighting, they were actually winning. For the final test, Council Leader Varn stood up and activated a completely new simulation system. This one was different from all the previous tests, larger, more complex, and designed to be completely impossible to win. The holographic battlefield filled the entire arena, showing a scenario that made even the most confident alien delegates look nervous. "This is what we call the impossible scenario," Varn announced, his 4 arms gesturing toward the massive display. "No species has ever passed this test. It is designed to evaluate how military commanders respond when facing absolutely certain defeat." The simulation showed a defending force that was completely outmatched in every possible way. The enemy had better weapons, more soldiers, faster vehicles, air support, and even orbital bombardment capabilities. The defenders were given basic equipment and told to hold their position for as long as possible against overwhelming odds. Varn looked directly at the human delegation. The enemy force outnumbers the defenders 50-1. They have superior technology in every category. The defending position has no strategic advantages. This test measures how commanders handle hopeless situations. The human team consisted of Colonel Reed, Admiral Nash, Captain Torres, Lieutenant Mike Johnson, and Sergeant Amy Parker. They stepped into the simulation carrying only standard weapons and basic communication equipment. The alien delegates watched with curiosity to see how long the humans would last against impossible odds. Reed looked at his team as they studied the tactical display showing their situation. The numbers were overwhelming. They faced an enemy army of 2,500 soldiers while they had only 50. The enemy had tanks, aircraft, and artillery while the humans had only small arms and limited ammunition. "Recommendations?" Reed asked calmly as if he were asking about the weather. Captain Torres studied the enemy positions on her display screen. "Standard defensive approach will not work," she observed matter-of-factly. "Enemy has better weapons, more troops, complete air superiority, and orbital bombardment capability. We cannot win a direct fight." Lieutenant Johnson nodded as he examined the battlefield layout. "So we do not fight a standard battle. We change the rules entirely." Sergeant Parker was already looking at different aspects of the simulation. "What is their supply situation?" she asked, thinking several steps ahead of the immediate tactical problem. Reed pulled up additional data about the enemy forces, information that most commanders would ignore because they would be focused on the immediate threat. "Very interesting," he said after studying the logistics reports. "They are operating far from their home base, completely dependent on supply convoys to bring them food, fuel, and ammunition." Admiral Nash smiled as she understood what Reed was thinking. "Then we do not fight their army directly. We fight their ability to sustain their army." Within the first hour of the simulation, the human team did something that shocked all the alien observers. They abandoned their assigned defensive position entirely. Instead of trying to hold ground against vastly superior forces, they split up and began moving across the battlefield in small groups. The alien delegates watched in confusion as the humans seemed to be running away from the battle. But Reed's team was not retreating. They were beginning a campaign of systematic disruption that targeted everything except the enemy soldiers themselves. They attacked supply convoys carrying food and ammunition to the enemy forces. They destroyed communication relays that the enemy used to coordinate their movements. They sabotaged fuel depots, leaving enemy vehicles stranded without power. When the enemy adapted by changing their supply routes, the humans immediately changed tactics and began psychological operations. The humans created false intelligence reports that made enemy commanders think they were facing a much larger force. They built dummy positions that looked like real defensive installations but were actually empty decoys designed to waste enemy ammunition. They spread coordinated misinformation that caused confusion and mistrust among enemy units. The alien delegates observed in growing amazement as the humans turned every aspect of the simulation into a weapon. The weather system became a tool for concealment. The terrain features became ambush points. Even the simulation's day and night cycle became part of their strategy as they timed their attacks for maximum effect. Captain Liss, the Mindari representative, leaned forward in her seat as she watched the human tactics unfold. They are not trying to destroy the enemy forces, she observed with growing understanding. They are trying to make the enemy destroy itself. She was right. The enemy forces, frustrated by their inability to find and fight the humans directly, began making increasingly desperate and poorly coordinated attacks. They started fighting each other over limited supplies. Their commanders made bad decisions based on false information. Their morale collapsed as they realized they were losing a war against an enemy they could not even see. The humans exploited each mistake, turning enemy aggression into weakness and enemy strength into vulnerability. Every time the enemy forces tried to adapt to human tactics, the humans changed their approach completely, staying always one step ahead. After 12 hours of simulation time, something happened that had never occurred in the history of the impossible scenario test. The enemy forces, despite their overwhelming advantages, began withdrawing from the battlefield. They were not retreating because they had been defeated in combat, but because they could no longer sustain their military operations. Council leader Varn stared at the tactical display in complete disbelief. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice shaking. The humans were outnumbered 50-1 with inferior equipment. Reed smiled as he stepped out of the simulation. "We were not fighting their army, Council leader. We were fighting their ability to remain an army."